Up next in the broadcast, the two Koreas hold their fifth round of talks to reopen the Kaesong Joint Industrial Complex, and still no breakthrough. But both sides agreed to meet again this week. Despite a final attempt to locate a key transcript from the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit, lawmakers came up empty and are now pointing fingers at each other. Japan voted in Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's coalition to the upper house of parliament, giving the nationalists effective control of both chambers. But will the hawkish leader make ripples with regional neighbors over his plans to revise the constitution? Primetime News begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Monday, July 22nd. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin near the inter-Korean border, where the fifth round of talks between the two Koreas on reopening a joint industrial zone ended without an agreement.
However, the two sides did manage to see eye to eye on the issue of inviting foreign companies to build factories in the complex. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports on the progress that remains.
Once again, the two Koreas wrapped up their discussions on Monday without an agreement. However, the two sides made some progress from their previous meetings as they based their discussions on their revised versions of draft proposals.
The two Koreas discussed four main issues: implementing safeguards against future closures, protective measures for safety of South Korean personnel and assets, globalizing the Kaesong Industrial Complex, as well as resuming operations.
Following the meeting, the South Korean chief delegate said the two sides are the furthest apart on the issue of providing preventive measures against similar incidents from happening again. Seoul is demanding that Pyongyang provide safeguards against future closures before the business park is reopened, whereas the North is calling for an immediate resumption of operations there. The South Korean official said Seoul made it clear that factories at the border town will not start running again until the North promises that such a unilateral shutdown will never take place again. However, the two Koreas did edge closer on the issue of inviting foreign companies to build factories in Kaesong.
I can't say that North Korea shared the same view as the South on Seoul's proposal for globalizing the Kaesong Industrial Complex, but it reacted positively to the idea.
Operations at the factory zone have been suspended for 3 months since the North unilaterally pulled out all North Korean workers amid an escalation of inter-Korean tensions. The South Korean chief delegate said that the two sides reaffirmed their respective positions during Monday's talks. The two Koreas will continue their efforts toward normalizing the joint business park at their sixth round of negotiations, scheduled to take place on Thursday in Kaesong. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And taking you now to Panama, where an investigation into a seized North Korean vessel is ongoing. The authorities there have verified the contents on board.
Two fighter jets were discovered in pieces along with missile radar systems. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports on the smuggled contraband.
It's taken them a week, but Panamanian officials on Sunday local time confirmed the contents of the North Korean ship they seized earlier this month. Two MiG-21 fighter jets originally made by the Soviet Union in the 1950s, and two missile radar systems were found on board the Cheoncheongang.
We have also managed to discover two radar systems that control the launching of missiles. They are the ones that guide the missile to the target.
Panama President Ricardo Martinelli said that other electric equipment and cables were found as well, but no explosives. The weapons were hidden under thousands of bags of sugar that Cuba says were a donation to the North Korean people. While authorities continue to unload the vessel, Panamanian authorities await the arrival of a United Nations inspections team on August 5th. They will ultimately determine whether North Korea's attempted shipment violated any UN sanctions. The 35 crew members of the seized ship have been detained for attempting to smuggle undeclared military cargo through its jurisdiction. North Korea has asked Panama to release them, but that request has been dismissed. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And back to Pyongyang, the reclusive regime is expected to host a celebration in grand fashion this Saturday for the 60th anniversary of the ceasefire of the 1950 to 1953 Korean War.
Our Kim Hyun-ji has more on how North Korea is gearing up for what they call Victory Day.
July 27th this year marks the 60th anniversary of the signing of the armistice agreement that halted the 3-year-long Korean War. In South Korea, the Korean War is described as the tragedy of fratricidal war, a kind of violence that must never be allowed to take place again. But North Korea celebrates the signing of the armistice agreement as Victory Day. To this day, Pyongyang maintains it successfully resisted the American and South Korean forces, who it says came to sign the armistice agreement holding a white flag. It looks like this year's Victory Day celebrations in North Korea will be especially big. The Voice of Russia reported earlier that Pyongyang sent invitations to the world's major media outlets, including China's Xinhua news agency and CNN. For this rare occasion, with so many foreign journalists in town, some say it's possible North Korean leader Kim Jong-un may offer to give a one-on-one interview during the celebration period. North Korea also says it'll showcase a new version of its Arirang mass games in commemoration of Victory Day. Meanwhile, U.S. President Barack Obama is scheduled to attend a ceremony marking the 60th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement in Washington this week. A diplomatic source in Washington says President Obama plans to deliver a speech at the Korean War Veterans Memorial on Saturday. South Korean President Park Geun-hye is expected to send a special delegation to the event, which is hosted by the U.S. Department of Defense. If President Obama does attend, he will become the first incumbent U.S. president to take part in a formal ceremony to mark the Korean War Armistice Day. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
For more on the inter-Korean talks and current situation unfolding on the Korean Peninsula, we are joined by Dr. Bong Young-sik, Director of Center for Foreign Policy at the Asan Institute. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
Well, Dr. Bong, we've seen round after round of these talks really center on South Korea's insistence of some sort of a guarantee that a shutdown of Kaesong won't happen in the future. Do you think that was a smart move in terms of the South's strategy?
I think it clearly reflects the top leaders' conviction that just rendering benefits to North Koreans without reliable systems reinstalled in place, then unfortunate events that took place in the past may repeat themselves, and that's not good for either North Korea or South Korea. Madam President Park Geun-hye has been really persistent in conducting not only domestic politics, but also foreign policy based upon principles. I think this is no exception.
Can you tell us some more about some of the arguments being used by the South Korean negotiators and whether they come at great cost to North Korea?
Well, it is premature to assess the costs and benefits of potentially failed negotiations to resume the operation of Kaesong Industrial Complex. Time is running out, that is for certain for both sides. Once North Korea celebrates the Victory Day, which is 27th, and stage extravagant military parade that would contribute to escalating the military tension on the Korean Peninsula, which should be very detrimental to making atmosphere conducive to productive negotiations. And North Korea also issued a warning that if the United States forces in South Korea and Rogue Army conduct a joint military exercise, Ulchi focus, then North Korea would regard it as a menacing and grave threat to the security, national security of North Korea. So it is very important for both sides to produce some tangible result in the next round of talk.
And how important is saving face during these negotiations, especially when they're trying to assign blame for the shutdown on either side? How does that play into the talks?
I think saving face is not as important as it used to be in the past negotiations between the two governments. For North Korea, it's a very insulated political system. The government monopolized the control over the media. And for South Korea, then there's a learning effect among South Koreans about how difficult and turbulent any negotiation between the Koreas should be. So there shouldn't be any big surprise if both sides fail to result in productive outcomes in the next round of talks. According to one survey that our institute conducted, about 40% of South Koreans believe that any failed negotiation between the two governments is primarily North Korea's fault. Another, about 40% of South Koreans believe that it is accountability for both governments. So unlike in the past, there is a diminished, benefit of doubts that South Korean public is willing to render to North Korean government for any failed negotiations.
You mentioned that Saturday is a celebration of Victory Day. We hear that some hefty $150 million is expected to go into the celebrations, and foreign journalists are invited to cover the story. Now, what do you read into North Korea's moves?
It is North Korea's own rationality very important to properly celebrate the 60th anniversary of the victory against the U.S. imperialism during the Korean War. We all remember that the day, July 27, 1953, was a day in which four related parties signed a ceasefire that suspended the Korean War. But North Korea's own understanding is that it is another example illustrating the miraculous charisma of the great leader, the eternal president of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, as a military genius. North Korea, under his leadership, experienced two victories against imperial powers. One was his defeat of Japanese imperialism during the Pacific War, and the other victory was the Korean War, that he defeated and drove away the U.S. imperialists from the Korean Peninsula.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your insights tonight.
Thank you.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features
restrictions on the rise.
closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report. Less than
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Meaning came on to news are trying to cover up the South's true intentions.
Turning now to the ongoing hunt for the missing transcript of the 2007 summit between the late former President Roh Moo-hyun and then North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. Officials spent Monday morning looking for it, but came up empty-handed once again. Our Eun Ju has details on the document behind the latest political squabble.
After 4 straight days of searching, the ruling and opposition parties have come to the conclusion that the original transcript of the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit does not exist at the National Archives of Korea. The result was reported at the National Assembly Steering Committee meeting late Monday afternoon. The ruling Saenuri Party representative Hwang Jin-ah said that they have done all they can to find the document but failed. The main opposition Democratic United Party's Woo Yoon-gun meanwhile pointed out what he called a serious inefficiency in the storage system at the National Archives of Korea and stressed that it is too early to conclude that the transcript was not transferred to the archives during the Roh Moo-hyun administration. Now, with the transcript still nowhere to be found, a fierce clash between the ruling and opposition parties is expected over which administration should be held responsible for the missing document. The Saenuri Party claims the liberal Roh administration destroyed the transcript, while the opposition has raised the possibility that the succeeding Lee Myung-bak administration got its hand on it. The DUP claims that someone during the Lee Myung-bak era broke into the computer network system used at the presidential office of Cheongwade during the Roh administration. Political experts speculate that prosecutors could open an investigation into the matter should the dispute between the parties spiral out of control. Eun Ju, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe won a decisive victory in the upper house elections on Sunday, setting the stage for Japan's first stable government since 2006. However, critics worry the hawkish leader will pursue his nationalist agenda rather than focusing on the economy. Arirang News' Chi Myung-gil has this report.
After 7 months in office, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and his coalition government won a strong majority in Sunday's upper house elections. Abe's Liberal Democratic Party won 65 seats, the highest number since the upper house election in 2001. Abe's coalition partner New Komeito secured 11 seats. Every 3 years, half the members of the 242-seat chamber stand for election. With Sunday's victory, LDP alone doesn't control the upper house, but the coalition now has a comfortable majority of 135 seats.
We received overwhelming support from the people for our policies of improving the economy and creating stable politics. We'll continue going forward with our brand of politics.
In a victory speech Sunday, Abe said he would focus on fixing the world's third biggest economy through his economic policy dubbed Abenomics, which mixes hyper-easy monetary policy and increased government spending. The LDP is also calling for revisions to the constitution supported by the Japan Restoration Party and Your Party.
As for changing the constitution, we will change all the clauses all at once, but we'll do it slowly in stages and let the people vote on it.
However, critics also worry Abe may shift his focus to a nationalist agenda that has long been central to his ideology, such as revising the country's post-war pacifist constitution and recasting Tokyo's wartime history with a less apologetic tone. Such a shift may further strain ties with Korea and China, where bitter memories of Japan's past atrocities run deep. Since Abe's coalition government came to power last December, Japan's economy has grown by 4% and the stock market by more than 40%. Chi Myung-gil, Arirang News.
In the nation's financial sector, Korean banks are expected to initiate restructuring programs that could cut bankers' salaries and even some cases cost their jobs. This comes as Korea's major banks have seen their earnings shrink in recent months in the face of low interest rates and looming credit risks. Our Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Local banks in Korea have recently seen their earnings drop, which could prompt them to take action. The net profit of 7 major local banks in Korea for the second quarter this year is estimated at around $1.5 billion, according to financial information provider FNGuide. That marks a huge drop from the same quarter last year and the previous quarter this year. The decline is due in part to an interest rate that's been kept low for months, shrinking the bank's interest income and the credit risks large conglomerates like STX Group are facing. Some affiliates of the shipbuilding company have been undergoing a creditor-led restructuring program. In times like these, the newly appointed presidents of 2 local banks have emphasized the importance of restructuring programs.
The low growth and low interest rate policy has been in place for a long period of time, prompting concerns about profitability and financial health. We have to overcome this crisis. We need to become a small but strong and efficient company. This is more than empty words for us. It should be a challenge that we must overcome.
KB Financial Group and Hana Bank are planning to significantly cut the salaries of their board members. They have yet to determine the exact amount of the cut, but many local banks are expected to follow in their footsteps. The Financial Supervisory Service has also ordered the banks to close branches that have posted losses. But if all these measures fail to help the banks improve their performance, experts say the banks may have to start cutting staff. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Thanks to the growing popularity of Korean pop culture, the country has seen a rise in its overseas income from intellectual property rights made by game developers, filmmakers, and music producers. But the country is still running a deficit in its intellectual property account. Park Ji-won tells us why.
The Korean wave of culture shooting around the globe has boosted Korean businesses and buoyed income, and the amount earned from intellectual property rights is no exception. Korean wave businesses, including entertainment companies and broadcasters, raked up some $800 million last year from intellectual property rights. That's a 17.6% jump from the previous year. The country's overseas income from intellectual property rights is on the rise thanks to the growing popularity of pop culture content and products. Global concerts by K-pop superstars like the rapper Psy have also been a big part of the increase.
When Korean performers stage concerts overseas under an exclusive contract with a U.S. entertainment agency, it's counted as overseas income from intellectual property.
But overall, Korea is still running a deficit in income from intellectual property rights. Korea earned some $3.4 billion in 2012 from intellectual property rights, including $800 million from the entertainment sector. But Korea paid about $8.4 billion to foreign countries for the use of intellectual property, including fees for patents, trademarks, and copyrights. That brought Korea's intellectual property deficit to nearly $5 billion last year, more than $3 billion of which was from the electronics sector. Although Korea is an electronics powerhouse, exporting more and more smartphones and semiconductors, it still pays a variety of fees to foreign patent holders. Experts say Korea needs to develop more original technology to reduce the intellectual property deficit. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The second half of the KBO season kicks off on Tuesday, and there are a lot to look forward to.
To give us an idea of what we can expect, SJ is standing by at the Sports Center. SJ, we're already halfway to the postseason.
That's right, and if you thought the first half was exciting, the second half looks even more promising, with the pennant race closer than ever. But let's take a look at what to expect in the second half. Of course, the LG Twins have been a big surprise so far this season, as they're just a half game behind the first-place Samsung Lions. But can they continue on with their first half success and make the playoffs for the first time in 11 years? Now, the Nexen Heroes are sliding after a hot start, as their rookie manager hopes to take to the team their first playoffs. But with the starters pitchers struggling right now, it's going to be pretty tough. Meanwhile, the Samsung Lions remain in first place, but with their foreign pitchers struggling right now, their domestic hurlers will need to step it up in the second half. And lastly, the SK Wyverns have been terrible this year, but they're only 6 games back in the playoff hunt, so a playoff berth is still within reach. And speaking of the second half of the MLB season has already begun, and Lee Hyun-jin of the LA Dodgers will be looking to finish the season on the way that he started. And going up against the South Korean will be the Toronto Blue Jays in an interleague match, as Josh Johnson, who's 1-5 with an ERA of 5.16, will take the mound for the Jays. Now, Lee Hyun-jin has been brilliant for the Dodgers, as he's currently 7-3 with an ERA of 3.09 so far this season. And speaking of the lefty, here's another lefty for you. Phil the Lefty Mickelson, who finally broke his Open Championship jinx and won it in a jaw-dropping fashion. Now, while many expected Lee Westwood, Tiger Woods, or Adam Scott to take the trophy after the final round, it was the 43-year-old Californian who stormed past everyone in the last round, shooting an amazing 66, putting 4 birdies in the last 6 holes to take this year's Open Championship trophy. Now, with the win, he becomes just the 4th golfer to win 3 different majors since 1980. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. See you guys again after midnight for your sports needs.
Mother Nature certainly wasn't kind today. China was hit by a deadly earthquake, and here in the nation, the heavy monsoon rain has killed 3 people.
Let's go over to our Kwon So-ah at the Weather Center for the latest. So just how much rain did we have today?
Guys, during a relatively short period of time, 360 millimeters fell in Yeoju and 150 millimeters, nearly 150 here in Seoul. But you know what was even worse was the rate at which the downpours came down.
Which exactly was what?
It was at nearly 100 millimeters per hour in southeast Gyeonggi province, and the rain is not yet over. The monsoon front moved up to North Korea in the afternoon, but it's going to come down again, meaning the rain will come down heavily through the night and tomorrow morning, similar to what we saw earlier today, so please be on the watch. Now down south, meanwhile, it's the heat wave still causing concerns. Now that heat, however, may also lead to sudden showers, but steady rain will again be seen in the central regions and North Gyeongsang province. So be careful on the roads, on the streets, and at home even, especially if you live on the first floor or lower. Now, temperature-wise, Seoul will get up to the high 20s, Daegu soars to 33 degrees, Gwangju and Busan hit 30 degrees. And 29 degrees for Daejeon, a very hot one for Jeju Island, while Dokdo and Wongeumgang make it to the mid-20s. Now take care everyone, and please tune in for another update after midnight.
Thank you, So-ah. And that's our broadcast on this Monday night. I'm Yuji Hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.